Let me tell you something you probably don't want to hear. Your home doesn't look as good as you want because you never learned how to make it look good. Not because you're careless or have bad taste, but because no one ever taught you the small, boring decisions that dictate whether a room actually works. So in this video, I'm going to show you 4 easy ways to make your home look good. And pay close attention because once you learn these 4 things, you'll start spotting the problem instantly in your own home and everywhere else. So one of the most common reasons a room in your home feels awkward or unfinished is that nothing is actually telling you where the room starts and stops. Especially in open layouts, furniture often ends up floating around with no clear boundary. The sofa's here, the chairs are there, and the coffee table kind of connects them, but visually it all bleeds together. And when that happens, the space can feel looser and colder than it needs to. But this is exactly what rugs are for. Not as decoration, not just to add softness, but to define a zone. A rug gives the furniture something to sit on visually. It tells your eye this grouping belongs together. But without that, even well-chosen furniture can feel temporary, like it could be slid around without changing the meaning of the space. But a rug works because it anchors the seating area. It creates a clear footprint for the room's main function, whether that's conversation or just lounging around, without putting up walls or changing the layout. And once that boundary exists, the entire room starts to make more sense. So in this first space, having this large rug pulls the entire seating area together. The ceiling is high and the room is expansive, but the rug keeps everything grounded. Without it, the furniture would feel scattered. But with it, the space feels well put together, even though nothing else had to move. Now in this room, the rug introduces some separation. Instead of the furniture blending right into the floor, the seating area reads as its own zone. And the room feels more complete, not because there's more stuff, but because the main area now has a defined base. And here, the rug subtly separates the sofa from the rest of the room, and it creates a clear boundary without cutting the room in half. And all the furniture feels settled, like it's meant to be exactly where it is. And then here, the rug gives the room a bit of energy and structure at the same time. The seating area feels distinct from the surrounding space, which makes the layout feel more dynamic without relying on extra furniture or accessories. So if you want to apply this in your own home, the rule is simple. The rug should be big enough for the furniture to actually sit on it. And I'm sure you've heard this 100 times before, but you want at least the front legs of the sofa and chairs to be touching the rug. Because when your rug is too small, it does the opposite of what you want. It fragments your space instead of anchoring it. But when you get the rug size right, your room immediately feels more finished without ever touching anything else. One of the easiest ways to make a room feel awkward without realizing it is by pushing everything against the walls. It sounds logical, especially in smaller spaces. You think you're opening up the room or creating more space. But visually, the opposite happens. When all the furniture hugs the perimeter, the center of the room becomes empty and the furniture starts to feel disconnected from each other. But floating your furniture fixes that. Not because you're trying to copy some loft-style layout, but because furniture works best when it relates to other furniture, not just to walls. And when pieces are pulled inward, they start forming a conversation zone instead of your place feeling like a waiting room. And floating furniture works because it creates a clear center of gravity. It tells you where the room's main activity happens, where people sit, talk, and relax. And once that center exists, everything else in the room suddenly makes more sense. Now, this doesn't mean shoving everything into the middle of the room or blocking circulation paths. It means giving furniture breathing room so it can relate to its neighbors instead of clinging to the edges of the space. So in this first example, the seating is pulled away from the walls to form a defined conversation area. The room still feels open, but now it has structure. And the furniture reads as a group, not a collection of individual pieces scattered around the perimeter. And from this angle, you can see how even a single chair and side table floating off the wall breaks up the room in a good way. The space feels layered, not flat, and the furniture feels like it was intentionally placed where it is, rather than parked in the corner like a car in a garage. And in this living room, the effect is even more clear. The furniture creates a central focal point around the coffee table, but there are still clear pathways behind the seating. Nothing feels cramped, but nothing feels overly loose either. And the slight angles in the seating soften the layout and invite you to move throughout the space. So if you want to do this in your own home, Just start small. Pull the sofa forward a few inches. Float one chair instead of pushing it back against the wall. And angle a few pieces slightly toward each other. You don't need an entirely new layout. You just need to stop treating the walls as your furniture's default parking spot. Because once your different pieces of furniture start relating to each other, your room immediately feels more comfortable and better designed without you having to buy a single thing. But now let's move into the bedroom, because in a lot of bedrooms, the wall behind the bed isn't doing anything. It's just a surface, and when the most important piece of furniture in the room is backed by a completely passive wall, the whole space can feel flatter than it ought to, even if everything else in the room is right. So this is where a feature wall comes in. Not because you need drama or texture for the sake of texture, but because your bed often looks better with a bit of a backdrop. It needs something that gives it visual weight and holds it in place. Without that, the bed can feel like it's floating in front of the wall instead of being anchored to it. So a feature wall works because it adds depth where depth is missing. It gives the room a sense of layering without changing the layout, the furniture, or how you actually use the space. And when it's done well, it doesn't scream feature wall. It just makes the room feel more intentional and more finished. And this isn't about going bold or committing to something extreme, because feature walls can be subtle and quiet and even stay within a neutral palette. What matters is that the wall behind the bed is no longer invisible. It's participating in the composition of the room. So in this bedroom, the wall behind the bed is left totally plain. And even with the plants and decor, the room feels a little bland. It's not a terrible bedroom by any means, but it looks a bit like the bed was only placed there because that's the one spot in the room where it would fit. And that's okay, but it makes the setup feel a bit temporary, as if you could move the bed to a different position at any moment. But in this bedroom, the wall behind the bed becomes part of the design. The vertical wood slats add some warmth and texture, but more importantly, they add depth. And the bed now feels solid in its position because the wall is framing it and making a statement that this is where the bed belongs. But another option for adding a feature wall behind your bed is using wallpaper. For example, look at this bedroom. It's clean and minimal, and many people would love to have a bedroom like this. But what if you added in some wallpaper to just spice things up a little bit? Well, if you want to stay within a neutral palette, a soft pattern wallpaper like this would be a great option. The colors stay calm and familiar, but the pattern adds just enough texture behind the bed to give the room that depth. It frames the bed, makes the wall feel deliberate, and gives you that designer look without changing the overall vibe of the space. And if you're open to adding a bit more personality, you can lean into a wallpaper with some subtle color. Something like this still works with the existing furniture and bedding, but it brings more life into the room. It does lean a bit feminine, but now the bed feels more heavily anchored, and the space starts to feel warmer and more expressive than with just the blank wall. And if you really want to make a statement, going bold and moody like this can also work really well, because this darker, more dramatic wallpaper transforms the wall into a true focal point. But because the wallpaper is only behind the bed, it doesn't take over the whole room. It just adds contrast, depth, and a really distinct atmosphere that completely changes how the space feels. And I could show you dozens of other examples here, but I think you can get the point. Wallpaper can make for a great feature wall if you use it tastefully. Of course, the tastefully aspect is where most people go wrong because they choose a style of wallpaper that doesn't work in their space at all. And that's why I developed the paper framework, which is specifically designed to help you think through where to apply wallpaper and which type of wallpaper you should use given your surroundings. I won't go into all the details here, but I fed the entire framework plus a bunch of other interior design best practices into a custom tool I built that generated these images that you're seeing here. So these wallpaper styles have not been chosen randomly. There's actually a lot of deep thinking and theory behind them. So if you want to get access to that tool and the underlying framework, so you can see how your own room would look with different types of wallpaper before you commit a bunch of time and money to a style that doesn't actually look good, there's a link in the description. Now, since we're talking about the bedroom, let's talk about what's happening on either side of the bed, because a lot of bedrooms technically have nightstands, but they're treated like accessories rather than structural elements of the room. One side has a table and the other side has nothing, or the nightstands are too small, too low, or too visually light that they don't add any weight to the bed at all. And when that happens, the bed stops feeling centered, even if it actually is. But nightstands matter because they complete the bed as a unit. They give it width, they give it balance, and just like a feature wall, they prevent the bed from feeling like a standalone object floating in the middle of the room. Now, this isn't about matching furniture sets or perfect symmetry, it's about visual weight, because when there's nothing substantial flanking the bed, all the attention collapses inward and the room can feel awkwardly narrow or unfinished. So adding proper nightstands works because it stabilizes the composition. The bed suddenly has boundaries, and it feels grounded instead of like something that was dropped into the room and left to die. So in these examples, notice that the nightstands aren't doing anything flashy. They're not decorative statements. What they're doing is holding their ground. In this setup, the nightstand has enough mass to visually counterbalance the bed. The lamp adds some height, the shelf adds a bit of depth, and the couple of objects sitting on there feel like they're there deliberately. So the bed no longer dominates the room, it's got some support in the form of the nightstand. Here, the nightstand works because it visually extends the headboard. The wood paneling wraps behind the bed and flows directly into the nightstand, which makes the entire bed zone read as a single continuous composition. And the low, wide proportions of the nightstand reinforce that horizontal line, while the lamp adds just enough vertical contrast so the setup feels unique. And here, the nightstand just feels really solid. It's set slightly away from the bed, but it creates this stability that lets you know that the bed is in the right place. And the bed feels comfortably framed, not boxed in. So if you want to do this in your own bedroom, the key is proportion and presence. Your nightstand should be roughly in line with the height of your mattress or slightly taller, wide enough to visually support the bed, and substantial enough that they don't disappear once you add a lamp. Because when the nightstands are done right, the bed feels finished. And when the bed feels finished, your entire bedroom suddenly feels more balanced, even if you don't change anything else. Now, what all of these examples have in common is that none of them rely on taste, trends, or buying more stuff. They work because they fix relationships. The relationship between the bed and the wall behind it. The relationship between furniture pieces and the space they sit in. The relationship between zones, movement, and visual weight. And once you start thinking this way, interior design stops feeling mysterious, because a room doesn't feel good or bad randomly. It's responding to very specific decisions, whether they were made consciously or not. Most people try to solve design problems at the surface level. They change colors, swap decor, or buy new pieces, hoping something finally clicks. But rooms that feel inviting and expensive almost always get the basics right first. They clearly define zones. They let furniture relate to each other, not just to the walls. They anchor what matters, and they give the important elements proper backing. That's the shift. You stop decorating emotionally and start designing intentionally. And the moment that happens, you don't just improve your own home, you gain a kind of visual literacy. And suddenly, you can walk into spaces and immediately understand why they work or why they don't. And that understanding is what saves you time, money, and frustration. Because you're no longer guessing. You're making decisions based on the principles of design. If you want to dive deeper into the principles of design, click the link in the description and drop in your email. I share completely different insights with my email subscribers, so you don't want to miss it. And now that you know a few different ways to elevate your home's design, you're going to need a system to tie it all together. So watch this video next where I'll teach you one of the design frameworks I've developed for turning boring, uninspiring rooms into spaces you love to spend time in.